If you're like me, then you'll probably prefer to carry things that are a little bit slimmer profile in your pockets every day. So if you want to carry a flashlight, that pretty much rules out any barrel style flashlights. So here's 5 flat style flashlights that you can carry with you every day. Number 1 is the Nitecore Tube V2. And these have been around for some time. Obviously this is the second version, and this is just a very small keychain flashlight. So you can see that it's about the same size as my thumb, which means that you barely notice it in your pocket, and it's super thin. It's also completely made from plastic and therefore is super light as well. So you don't notice it in your pocket and you don't notice it on your keychain. But when you need it, it comes in very, very handy. It has 2 modes, so it's nice and simple to operate. It has a single button on the front, and you do 1 press for 1 lumen and another press for 55 lumens, which is plenty of light in most situations. So nice and simple. I have a bunch of these, including ones in the packet for when these ones eventually die, because they don't last forever. They are breakable. They do have IP65 water resistance, but I have had a couple die on me, but they get a pretty hard time when they're being bashed around on your keys all the time. So I wouldn't let it put you off. I would still recommend it. They are USB rechargeable, but it is a micro B connection, which may put you off. If you're trying to find something that's USB-C, then this isn't going to be the flashlight for you. But if you're just looking for something pretty simple that you can stick on your keys and forget about until you need it, then I would highly recommend one of these. Battery life on the Tube is around 1¼ hours if you're on the full 55 lumen output, and if you're on 1 lumen, it's supposed to be able to go for 58 hours continuously. Although I haven't tried it, but I don't have to charge this thing very often, so I think that's probably right. Despite what it looks like with the 2 here and the 1 here, they are actually available in a bunch of other colours also. You can get like yellow, pink, blue, but I quite like this semi-translucent black colour. The second flashlight is also a Nitecore, and that is this. This is the Tip flashlight, and this is actually the successor to the Tube. It's a bit fatter, as you can see, comparing the two. It's thicker, it's longer, and it's also wider. So all in all, it is a lot bigger than the Tube. It's also got a completely metal construction versus the Tube. The Tip also has far more functionality than the Tube. You can see here it's got 2 buttons on it. So it actually does a maximum output of 360 lumens, a high of 150, a mid of 35, and a low of 1. Using the mode button, you can just cycle through those modes. The Tip is IP54 rated, which means it can be submerged in water, even though it has an open port, which again, like the Tube, is a micro B. These lights, both the Tube and the Tip, were released a number of years ago. They are still available, but I believe this one may have been discontinued, but you can still get it on Amazon, and there is a successor, I think, Tip 2, which presumably has some better features. Battery life for this on turbo mode is 30 minutes, although I don't think that's continuously. That's because it does step down when it starts to overheat. You get an hour and a half on the 150 lumen mode, 6.5 hours at 35 lumens, which is the mid-level, and 46 hours on the 1 lumen mode, which again, I haven't tested, but is pretty long. And you can see from the state of this particular one, it's had a lot of use. This is the only one of these I've ever had to buy. So I would say this is probably a little more reliable than the Tube. It can take a bit more of a beating. It has some impact resistance versus the Tube, and therefore I haven't had to replace it. Next up, and the final offering from Nitecore, is this. This is the Tini 2, and this is actually the flashlight that I currently carry every day because it's quite a bit smaller than the other two, but it's much more powerful. Here you can see it's much shorter than the Tip. It's pretty much the same width, and it's also pretty much the same thickness. All in all, this is a better light than this one, but it's much more expensive. The Tini 2 is USB-C rechargeable, and it has this little screen on the front which allows you to see your battery life as well as cycle through what mode you're in. You can see there's 15 lumens, there's 65 lumens, there's 200 lumens, and there's 1 lumen. And you can see for each of those modes how much battery life is left and the runtime of that particular mode that you're in. There's also a turbo mode that is 500 lumens, but you can see that's going to run you for a maximum of 5 minutes before it shuts off, and you also have to keep the button depressed. The runtime for the Tini 2 in turbo mode is just 15 minutes, assuming that you have enough battery life, but of course, as I showed you before, on the display it will tell you the battery time remaining. For the 200 lumen standard high mode, you will get 45 minutes. The 65 lumen mid mode will be 2.5 hours. You get 8 hours for the 15 lumen low mode, and then the ultra low 1 lumen mode, you will get a staggering 60 hours. In my day-to-day usage with a mixture of different uses, I will probably have to charge this thing maybe once every week or two, so the battery life is pretty good in general use, assuming you're not using the turbo mode all the time, which, to be honest, it's pretty bright, so you know, I tend to use something like the mid 65 lumen mode most of the time. The Tini 2 comes in a few different colours. This one is some sort of grey, but they do a titanium version, which obviously would be stronger, but they are all at least aluminium or higher, which gives them about 1 meter of impact resistance, at least on the basic model, and then the titanium one I guess might be a bit higher. And these are IP54 rated, so again you can submerge them, and the charging port on this particular one has a little rubber cover which is covering, in this instance, finally, a USB-C. So if you are looking for a USB-C small flashlight that is flat, then this would be my recommendation. Next up is the Manker F14. This is obviously somewhat chunkier than the previous 3 Nitecores, and the reason is because it also doubles as a battery bank. It also has a max output of 1250 lumens. Yeah, this thing is bright. Just like the Tini 2, the Manker has 2 LEDs. The difference with the Manker is you can actually operate them independently, one being a floodlight and one being a spotlight. There's also a difference in color temperature between the two. There are a bunch of different brightnesses on this particular light, so I'm not going to go through them all, but you can go anywhere from 1 lumen all the way up to that 1250 lumen if you have both lights active. Individual maximums are 750 lumens for the floodlight and 520 lumens for the spotlight, and lows are 140 lumens and 70 lumens respectively. All the different light levels are reached by using a number of different presses on the single operation button, which does mean that you do have to have a bit of a memory for the different functions. Ultimately, they tend to be a single press, a double press, a triple press. You get the idea. The construction of the light is full metal jacket. It has a cutout for a lanyard at the base. And speaking of the base, there are a couple of handy magnets, meaning that you can attach it to a metal surface and therefore you can direct your light hands-free. Charging of the F14 is by USB-C, and as previously mentioned, you can also use this to charge other items because it acts as a power bank. Although it doesn't actually tell you how big the battery is, so I wouldn't rely on it as your main source of power, but it might get you out of a pinch if you are running low on battery. Maybe charge one of your other flashlights. The F14 also features a pocket clip on the back and is fairly robust. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but you can't move it and it doesn't allow for deep carry. All in all, the F14 is a fairly robust flashlight with a lot of power and a lot of functionality. But all of that power and functionality comes at the cost of size because it is an absolutely massive chunky boy compared to something like the Tini 2. And last, but by no means least, is this. This is the Wuben X3 Owl. And this thing is kind of amazing. It's got a lot of features. Now you might be thinking this is an absolutely huge flashlight, which in this configuration it really is, but this is just a charging case. The flashlight itself fits into and comes with a charging case, assuming that you go for the top model. When you pull it out, the flashlight itself is actually pretty compact for the amount of power that it has. The maximum output in turbo mode for the X3 is 700 lumens, and to be honest with you, for me that is plenty. It also does high of 150, a mid of 50, and that low mode of 1 lumen. It's IP65 rated, so again it's gonna put up with most weather conditions. You can submerge it, all of that fun stuff. And whilst it's a similar size to the F14, it is quite significantly lighter and much more comfortable in the hand than the Manker, because it's just that bit smaller. It's a little bit shorter, it's a tiny bit thinner, it's a tiny bit narrower, and it's just a little bit more ergonomic. It's got some cutouts on the side, and it just feels nice in the hand. Whereas the F14 is just pretty straight-sided, so there's not much to hate about it. It's just kind of square. Just the flashlight part itself weighs just 70 grams, which for the size feels really light. Battery runtime on the X3 in turbo mode is just 30 seconds, and then it will drop down to 200 lumens, where you'll get a further 1.5 hours. You're going to get 2 hours in high, that's the 150 lumen mode. You're going to get 6 hours in mid, and you're going to get 50 hours at 1 lumen. But of course the party trick is that you've got some extra juice in the case, because that will recharge the flashlight when you put it back in the case. The capacity of which is 3000 milliamp hours, so you're going to get a decent number of charges for the flashlight out of the case. In fact, Wuben say you can get up to 100 days out of this and this combination together. Again, I haven't tested that, because who's got 100 days to test a flashlight? I haven't even had it for 100 days. Some of the other interesting features of the Wuben X3 is this. This is the 180-degree rotating head, which means that you can have the LEDs forward facing, or you can have them in the traditional pattern where they are on the top. So that allows you to stand it up and face it forward, or you can use it like a regular light. It's just really handy. Until you've got it, you don't realise how handy it is. Much like the F14, it also has a magnetic tail. So this helps with the usefulness of the rotating head, because now you can hang it from something and you can face the light forward or down. Very handy. Another use for the rotating head, when you put it in the forward position and then you put it in the case, it has this diffused section, which means that you can turn it into a lantern, and then you can place that on a surface and light up the room, and it's going to run off of the battery inside the case as well as inside the flashlight. Much like the Tini 2, it also has a battery indicator on the top, although it doesn't actually tell you the runtime. It just shows you what mode you're in and a battery remaining. So not quite as good as the Tini 2, because it doesn't tell you how long's left, but it's still very useful to have a little screen on there so you know what mode you're in, rather than having to think how many clicks through do I need to go. It's also got an indicator on the front to let you know if it's got charge in it or not. If you haven't got the case to hand, or it's run out of battery, unfortunately the torch itself doesn't have any means to charge it directly using USB-C, but it does have wireless charging, which means that you can plonk it on any standard wireless charger and it will charge the flashlight using wireless technology. So pretty good. It is worth mentioning, however, that is the only two means of charging the flashlight. You either need the charging case or you can do it wirelessly, but there's no direct input to the flashlight. Even I think the lower model without the case still requires a proprietary dock, which is a little bit unfortunate, and it's the only one on the list that requires proprietary charging. But That said, because it comes with either the case or the dock itself, and you can also use wireless charging, I think there's enough methods there that means that you shouldn't worry too much about it not being able to accept a cable. Finally, the X3 has a clip on the back. This means you can clip it in your pocket or maybe on the brim of a cap, which with the rotating head is actually very useful because you could either illuminate directly in front of you by pointing it down or out ahead of you by rotating it forwards. Unfortunately, also like the F14, it doesn't allow for deep carry, so if you are going to keep it in your pocket, it is going to sit proud of the pocket. And that completes my list of 5 flashlights. Let me know down in the comments, are you thinking of picking up any of these flashlights? If you are, links will be down there too. They are affiliate links, so I will get a little kickback for those, but they will be no extra cost to you. Let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.